and welcome to the June 5th meeting of the City of Brookhaven's Planning Commission. I'm Stan Siegel, and I'll be presiding this evening. This public meeting has been called on matters pursuant to the Brookhaven zoning ordinance and specified on tonight's agenda. The June 5th meeting is called to order. You'll find copies of the agenda and some of the materials in the back of the room. And if you plan on making a public comment, we'll ask you to fill out a comment card. Again, you can find them in the back of the room, bring them up here to the staff if you will. And I'd like to call the roll, and if each of the commissioners, just as a way of introduction, will kind of raise their hand and say they're here. Commissioner Shannon Cameron.
Here.
Commissioner Rob Francoeur is not here tonight. Commissioner John Funny is not here with us. Commissioner John Hess.
I'm here.
Commissioner Jack Hundred.
Here.
And Commissioner Adrian Schmidt.
Here.
All right, so we have, let the record show, we have 5 members present. Commissioner Francoeur, Commissioner Funny are not in attendance this evening, so we have a quorum and we'll proceed. At this time, I'd ask everyone to kind of check your cell phones, including mine. Make sure they're on silent or off, please. I'd like to introduce, so you've met the commissioners. I'd like to just introduce the Director of Community Development, Ms. Susan Cannon, and our City Planner, Mr. Howard Kuntz. And our City Attorney is with us, Mr. Bill Riley. So we've got the copies of the agenda. Let me give you a little, just a short paragraph on who we are and what we do here. The Planning Commission is established by the Code of Ordinances of the City of Brookhaven. We conduct public hearings on land use, zoning changes, code text amendments, and other related matters. This commission does not rezone property, but rather is an advisory board which reports its findings and recommendations for consideration of action to the mayor and the city council of Brookhaven. So it's more, we're here for public input. We're here to listen to what people have to say. We're here to have you learn understand what's going on, and then we make a recommendation. So this meeting is called, this June 5th meeting is called to order. And item number 1 is the approval of minutes from the approval of the Planning Commission meeting work session minutes, April 25th, 2013. Do I have a motion?
Make a motion for the approval of the Planning Commission April 25, 2013 work session minutes.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the minutes for the April 25th work session are approved. All right, we also have our regular meeting minutes, so the May 1st, 2013 meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
I make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So we have approved the minutes of the work session for April 25th and the regular meeting minutes on May the 1st. I don't believe we have any organizational or procedural items. Susan, do we? Nothing. And I think we finished everything last time, so there's no unfinished business, is there?
No, sir.
Oh, it's always good to have no unfinished business. So the new business this evening is the public hearing on text amendments for RZ 13-02. It's an ordinance, RZ 13-02 text amendment to the zoning ordinance regarding the Brookhaven Peachtree overlay. I'm going to ask Ms. Cannon to read that to us, and maybe before I do one moment, I'm going to kind of tell you what we're going to do. We're going to read the amendments. The staff's going to present, tell us their recommendations on it. Then we will invite the public to comment. After the public comment section is over with, we as commissioners will have an opportunity to ask the staff questions. We'll have the opportunity to ask the public, anyone who had presented questions, and then we'll discuss it and vote a recommendation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jackie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is public hearing item RZ 1302, which is the text amendment to the zoning ordinance, as you indicated, regarding the Brookhaven Peachtree overlay. I'd like to note that in March, the City Council imposed a 3-month moratorium on the geographic area known as the Brookhaven Peachtree Overlay. The map in the front of the room is a draft map which does identify that particular geographic area. This particular moratorium is effective through June 25th, or if we are able to accomplish an amendment to the text, the moratorium would be lifted sooner, but it should not extend past June 25th. The direction was for the staff to consider technical aspects for implementation purposes, and in that regard, the staff was directed to meet with former DeKalb personnel who were charged with the implementation aspects of the code, as well as overlay committee members, and additionally, we did solicit public input. We put a link on our website to gather input from the community to consider changes that should be addressed in the overlay. There was a twofold charge in this direction. The first charge was for the staff to take a look at the existing Brookhaven Peachtree overlay to determine whether or not language needed to be changed relative to how to interpret density. The second charge was to consider whether there were any additional technical changes that should be at this time addressed in the overlay. After gathering the input from personnel, former personnel, with committee parties, and with the community, the staff prepared a collective list and analyzed that list and presented that list to the council in a work session. And from that work session, the clarification and direction was for the staff to address the areas that are outlined in the text amendment, which has been posted on the web in your package and available to the public. Those items that we were directed to clarify were the method by which to measure building height within the overlay, the direction to amend the definition of story, the direction to look at increasing parking allowances and requirements in restaurants, and we did address that. The addition of provisions to allow for sidewalk signage in the overlay. Although the staff does believe, and did believe at that time and does believe now, that the current language is clear on how density is calculated, we were asked to add clarifying language so that other readers, that it would be clear to other readers. So we've also done that. There was a typographical error in the existing code. And actually, that's section 27-728.15.12, subparagraph G4C. So we did take the liberty of making that change. This particular text amendment has been duly advertised for this particular hearing. Subsequently, this particular text will be heard by the Mayor and Council on June the 11th, and the ordinance at 7 p.m. in this room, and the ordinance reads as follows. Text amendment to the City of Brookhaven zoning ordinance relating to the Brookhaven Peachtree Overlay District. Whereas the City of Brookhaven Mayor and Council are tasked with the protection of the city's health, safety, and general welfare, and whereas the City of Brookhaven Mayor and Council are authorized to exercise zoning powers, whereas the city lawfully assumed planning and zoning responsibilities from DeKalb County on January 17, 2013, and whereas to ensure the responsible governance over zoning, land use variances, and other statutory controls on the uses of property within the boundaries of the Brookhaven Peachtree Overlay District within the City of Brookhaven, the city imposed a moratorium to study technical aspects affecting implementation of the Overlay District not to exceed midnight on June 25th, 2013. And whereas the Community Development Director reviewed the Brookhaven Peachtree Overlay District language within the zoning ordinance, solicited public input, and held various meetings with interested parties, and whereas the Community Development Director provided an outline of feedback received to the Mayor and Council, and whereas the Community Development Director advised the Mayor and Council that density is regulated by the underlying zoning district and recommended limited technical revisions relating to parking, signage, story, and height, and whereas the Community Development Director received further direction from the Mayor and Council to amend the district overlay in regard to applicable density, And whereas the mayor and council find that a text amendment is needed to provide for effective administration of the Brookhaven Peachtree Overlay District, now therefore it is ordained, be it ordained by the mayor and council of the city of Brookhaven, and is hereby ordained by the authority of same, that Chapter 27 of the Code of the City of Brookhaven, also known as the City of Brookhaven zoning ordinance, adopted January 15, 2013, is hereby amended as follows. Section 27-728.15.2F, subparagraph 2, is hereby amended by the deletion of subparagraph 2 and the substitution of subparagraph 2 as follows. 2. All building heights are to be measured from the average elevation of the finished sidewalk, measured along the building facade facing the street, with the highest daily traffic volume, to the top of cornice or top of parapet wall for flat roof buildings, or the bottom of the eave for sloped roof buildings. Levels measuring less than 6 feet in height for the purpose of raising the first floor level. The next word about should be replaced with the word above, the street level. Providing a consistent first floor level crawl space, or for the sole purpose of housing mechanical, plumbing, or electrical equipment, shall not be counted as stories for the purpose of calculating maximum building heights. Part 2. Section 27.728.15.12F, subparagraph 3, is hereby amended by adding the following sentence to subparagraph 3 as follows. 3. The second story shall be heated and available for human occupancy, consisting of no less than 75% of the square footage of the floor area beneath, less than except outdoor assembly area. Part 3. Section 27.728.15.10A is hereby amended by the addition of subparagraph 4 as follows. 4. Restaurants. 1 parking space for every 125 square feet of dining area, including outdoor dining space, minimum and maximum. Part 4. 27.728.15.11 signs is hereby amended by the addition of the following language to such section. Sidewalk signs shall be allowed within the Brookhaven Peachtree Overlay District. Sidewalk signs are defined as an A-frame or easel-style sign to be placed on the sidewalk in conjunction with a business establishment. The following shall apply to sidewalk signs. 1. Sign composition material. Wood or metal, dry erase or chalkboard style. 2. Setback from right-of-way. It must be situated to allow for clear passage with a minimum accessible sidewalk width of 36 inches in compliance with American Disabilities Act. 3. Number of signs allowed, 1 per establishment. 4. Maximum height, 3 feet. 5. Sign area, no larger than 6 square feet. 6. Sign placement per establishment shall not be placed beyond the exterior wall facade for tenant space. 7. All sidewalk signs shall be removed daily upon cessation of business hours and shall be stored indoors. 8. No sidewalk sign shall be lit, contain neon, or contain plastic construction or embellishment. 9. Evidence of neglect or dilapidation of any sidewalk sign shall provide cause for immediate removal. 10. Sidewalk signs shall not require a sign permit or authorization sticker affixed to the subject sign. Part 5. Section 27-728-15.1 scope of provision shall be amended by adding the following sentence to read as follows. Conflict means there are competing regulations or provisions. In the absence of a provision in the overlay district, the regulations of the underlying zoning shall apply. Part 6, Section 27.728.15.12 G4C is hereby amended by the substitution of the word pubic with the word public. Part 7, effective date. This ordinance is providing for a text amendment and moratorium expiration shall become effective upon adoption by the mayor and city council. Part 8, severability. Should any section or provision of this ordinance be declared by a court of competent jurisdiction to be invalid or unconstitutional, such decision shall not affect the validity of this ordinance as a whole nor any part thereof, other than the part so declared to be invalid or unconstitutional. Part 9, repeal of conflicting ordinances. This ordinance amends the City of Brookhaven zoning ordinance, and all other conflicting ordinances or resolutions are hereby repealed, providing that nothing herein shall be construed as repealing the conditions of use, operation, or site development accompanying permits lawfully issued under previous ordinances or resolutions, and provided further that modifications or repeal of those past conditions of approval may be accomplished as as authorized and provided by the requirements of the zoning ordinance. Mr. Chairman, that is the read of the text amendment. The staff does recommend approval of this text as read into the record with the correction of the word about to above in Part 1, Paragraph 2. If the Planning Commission commission has any questions, I'll be happy to address those, either now or at such point that you feel comfortable with that.
Well, let's open, let's, do any of the commissioners have questions for the staff, and then we'll take public comment afterwards, but let's clarify, see if there's anything that needs clarification at this point. Commissioner Cameron?
No, after the work session, I have my answers. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Schmidt?
Apologies for not attending the work session. This question might have been already addressed, but I'll ask it anyway. With respect to Part 3, Paragraph 4 there on page 10 in the packet, restaurants, the parking space, the dining space calculation of outdoor dining space being included, this is really kind of a question from a permitting standpoint. When a new restaurant is permitted, the outdoor dining spaces are permitted as part of the, or if they do an outdoor dining space, it's set forth up front in the business permit for the location, or are they added on an ad hoc basis?
That can happen. In that particular case, they would have to have adequate parking, and the reason for that provision in here is in some of the overwhelming comments that we received. Some of the information was that it appeared that the overlay would only allow perhaps maybe 10 spaces for restaurants. So the direction was for us to take a look at how to increase that requirement. So this particular provision, as an example, if you had a 5,000 square foot dining area, with this particular provision that would provide for 40 parking spaces. So we didn't want to open up the door to have a sea of parking, but we wanted to open up the door to require more parking. So that's the reason for that provision.
So conceivably, if there's a restaurant that's in operation today that has a garden, and at some point a year from now, the garden is, part of that garden is reclaimed to be an outdoor patio dining area, they would have to approach the city for permission to utilize that space for serving patrons?
We would have to make sure they have enough parking to accommodate that, yes, sir.
That's fine. Thank you.
Commissioner Hunter?
No questions.
Okay. Commissioner Hess?
I have no questions.
And I have no questions for the staff at this time. All right, so at this point, we're going to open it up for public comment. Let me remind you, one, if you're going to make a comment, we will need you to fill out a comment card and submit it up at the staff. We've got one so far. The cards are in the back of the room if anybody. We have 10 minutes, so keep in mind you have other people in this room who will want to speak. I'd ask you to be concise and let us know what you think, so help us make a decision. But I'd ask, try not to repeat, what everybody else has said, but it's your time.
I have 3.
We have 3 so far. Anybody else? Okay, when you come up, please state your name and your address so we know who you are and where you live or who you represent. You want me to start? Or you want me to call people?
Sure.
All right, we'll start with Jim. Is it Maloney? Mallory, I'm sorry. Mr. Mallory, come up and tell us where you live.
I live in Brookhaven Heights.
Okay.
My name is Jim Mallory. First of all, I personally like the overlay plan the way it was originally. 2 equals 2. 2 stories is the way it should be. And let me give you a little background. First of all, I taught special ed children in the state of Georgia for 34 years. I also have a degree in historic preservation and urban planning from Georgia State. And so I do know somewhat about good neighborhoods. I know during the planning session, several of you asked what would be good about this. Well, if y'all give me a call, I'll take any of you as long as you're willing to pay for lunch in my Cooper, and I can show you 3 unique neighborhoods in Atlanta that represent what we need in Brookhaven. First is the Oakhurst neighborhood. Then, of course, there's famous Decatur. And this would make Capital City cringe. Then there's my favorite neighborhood, Little Five Points. But they all are diverse urban neighborhoods, is what the community overlay is trying to do. And we need to keep it 2 stories. That's what was set up originally, and it needs to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. We appreciate your comment. When you come up, if you would let's make sure we've got, it's being recorded, I guess, by Larry Hurst. Mr. Hurst? And if you let us know where you live,
I live in Ashford Park.
if you speak and try to...
My issues with parking,
Okay.
I want to make sure I know what I'm talking about. Jack, the original overlay was how many...
Please direct all questions to me. We're
I'm sorry.
not, we're, this is your time to tell us and give us some input. Unfortunately, this is not a...
I just want to make sure I know what I'm talking about. So the original overlay was how many minimum and maximum per square foot? Was it 2 per 200 square feet?
I'll ask Ms. Cannon and the staff to address that.
And now it's been amended to 2 per 1.
Well, wait, there was one question. What was the original? Do you know?
Actually, it's my understanding that restaurants could not have more than 10 spaces. And this particular amendment, and actually in the code, it doesn't say restaurant, it just says retail. So this actually line items restaurant to identify a larger parking requirement based on the feedback that we were receiving from all parties.
Okay.
My
So
only
your
comment,
comment-
my only comment is this: as long as a business adheres to the strict overlay requirements of parking, meaning behind the building or underground, why would you put a maximum? What's the point in putting a maximum? Why not let them build as many spaces as they want, as long as we can't see them? That's my only point. Why would you have the minimum and the maximum always be the same? That doesn't make any sense, and to me, it's leading to Virginia Highlands, where when I go to Verde and Kaleidoscope on a Thursday or Wednesday night, I often cannot find a place to park. And that's my concern. The parking is already backing up into those neighborhoods. When you go to Haven on a Saturday night, half the cars are parked down the street. So I would only ask that you have a minimum, but let the maximum be whatever they want, as long as they adhere to the absolute strict overlay requirements, meaning you really can't see the parking because it's on the back or it's underground. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your input. We appreciate you letting us know how you feel about things. Okay, the next is Mr. Will Scherer. You're going to go tell us where you live or
Yes,
who you
I
represent?
live on Bel Air Drive,
Okay,
and I'm making a comment related to Part 5, which relates to the density issue.
okay.
And the comment is, it appears from the whereas clauses and the rest that the intent of this amendment is to make it clear that density is governed by the underlying zoning. And there are two sentences here. The first attempts to define conflict as meaning competing regulations or provisions. The second is saying in the absence of provision in the overlay district, the regulations of the underlying zoning shall apply. My comment and suggestion is that you do not need or want the first sentence to be included in the amendment. The reason being is that I believe that that sentence could be misused or misconstrued by a party to say what competing may or may not mean. If the intent of the amendment here is to make it clearer or simpler, to simply say density is governed by the underlying zoning, you either use that sentence or just use the second sentence, which is intending to say there is no density language in the overlay. Therefore, in the absence of a provision related to density, that means the underlying zoning applies. But again, if you leave the first sentence in, I'm concerned the intent, which is laid out clearly in the whereas clauses, that density is not governed by the overlay, that someone could use that first sentence in a way to come to a conclusion that I think is not intended by this board or the city.
All right, thank you so much for your comment, Mr. Chair.
It's about 4.5 minutes remaining.
Sorry?
4.5 minutes.
4.5 minutes and 3 people to go. So, Mr. Bill Draper. So again, we've only got a few minutes, so.
Right. Bill Draper, I live in Brookhaven Fields. I support the text amendment, but I have a couple of problems with some of the information in here. As far as second floor only being 75%, this exempts patios. So the only thing that I've been able to understand as to why it would be 75% instead of 100% is something about sloped roofs taking up space or something like that. There doesn't seem to be anything other than atriums and patios that would require space. The the square footage of a second floor should be 100%, because once you exempt patios, there's no other reason why you would have less than 100%. Based on the way this is written, if an owner considers 55% of the roof of his first story to be a patio, he only needs to have a 20% second story. That's what we were doing this text amendment to get away from, to avoid. But that's still possible, the way it's written. The problem with the actual facade, Gary Cornell, Director of Planning, former Director of Planning, had listed in here that the entire width of the facade visible to the primary street.
Excuse me, Mr. Draper, they can't hear through the breathing.
Sorry. Can you hear now?
I want to give you as much time as you need, but please keep in mind, we have other people who would like to speak
Trying
as
to be
well.
very, very fast here. The entire width of the facade should be visible from the primary street, which means when you're on the street, whether you've got 25% taken off that second floor, the entire width of the building should be seen as a heated second floor. And that was the purpose of the overlay, and that was what Gary Cornell wanted to see included in this. As far as density goes, if the overlay was to refer to section 2745 of Brookhaven zoning code, it would relate to the land use plan and to the town center zoning category that all of the overlay is, except for one property. And that's what DeKalb County has always used as density. And that's what could be used if the overlay was written to actually relate to 2745. Anyway, it's a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Draper. Again, we're trying to get everybody, but we need to move it along. Mr. Bill Roberts? Again, I'd ask if something you've said has been addressed, it's your time, but.
Fair enough. Yeah, Bill Roberts, I live in Brookhaven Heights, also in the BPCA. I'm also going to address the second story language in part 2. If you guys, and I've heard some of the rationale for why there's a 75% versus the 100% full second story, and what I'd like to propose is if the 1.75 is the way you guys want to go for creativity reasons or flexibility from a design standpoint, maybe we could consider that on the secondary roads that would be adequate, but on Peachtree, which is the main corridor in the overlay, I think a second story, 100% should be the minimum, maybe even more density than that. Maybe it should be a 3-story building, and I just wanted to throw that out there. I will say that this is a step in the right direction versus the way the overlay has been written today, because second story was vague and there's a lot of liberties taken with what constitutes a second story. So this is a step in the right direction to tighten the language up. But maybe we could consider the secondary roads 1.75 is adequate, but on Peachtree itself, maybe we need to differentiate and say that needs to be more density.
Great. Thank you very much. I assume that our 10 minutes are up. I will say that in public comment, we have 3 citizens, 3 who have not had a chance to speak, but I would entertain a motion for a set number of minutes. But we will not accept, I think we'll close and not have anybody beyond these 3. So if I have a motion to extend this time, I'd certainly entertain it.
I'd like to make a motion to listen to the next 3 citizens.
And any specific time, any specified time?
I'd like to make it limited to 5 minutes.
Do we have a second?
I would second that.
Okay, all in favor of extending the public comment for a maximum of 5 minutes and these 3 speakers?
Aye.
All right. All right, so Ms. Kathy Forbes?
I'll be fast. Okay, Kathy Forbes, Brookhaven Heights neighborhood. Just going to reiterate what has been said. Second story is two floors. There's just no need for 75%. So if you want to include design elements, write that in the language. Second story is 100% of the square footage of the first floor, unless there is a patio or an atrium or whatever, but there can be language that satisfies everyone. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Ms. Forbes. Ms. Rhonda Fox? Ms. Fox? Gonna go state where you're from, your name and where you're from.
Brookhaven Heights, Rhonda Fox. Maybe I need to lower this. I don't want to reiterate what everybody else has said, but I do want to point out that Peachtree Road is the jewel of Brookhaven for our business district, and of course residences too. I think we have to be very careful with city planning. I like the overlay. It was thoroughly thought out, well thought out. I don't mind some changes. I'm worried about the second story. I think it should be more dense than that, 3, 4, or 5 stories, because that's the main corridor and because it's right next to MARTA. And I don't mind the density being there because I'm hoping that more people will walk and bike and use our rapid transit system. Also, I think it will affect our tax base. That's got to be a big tax base for our city. The more business we can put into that area, the better. So why not make it a minimum of 2 stories and let someone build that restaurant that is only half a restaurant and has an outside seating area on the 3rd story?
Thank you so much for your input. And then our last speaker this evening, Mr. Michael Smith. Mr. Michael Smith?
I had checked just to have it written in the comments, but I'll speak as well if you want.
Well, we can do the other? It's up to you.
Michael Smith, I'm in Brookhaven Heights Association
Okay.
as well, and definitely support having 2 stories. I will mimic what Rhonda said. I think 2 stories should be a minimum. As a resident of Brookhaven Heights, we're concerned that anything below that leads to different interpretations. You get variances. And then next thing you know, it's 1.5 stories for things getting built up and down Peachtree. I agree that if we have more density, that would be better from a tax perspective. And any less than that, we get worried also about what that could do with the parking situation and having, parking in our neighborhood, which we don't want. So just support 2 stories and not the text amendment as it stands right now.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate you speaking. I should have read the bottom and said you just wanted to enter it into the. All right, so this concludes the public comment section of our meeting this evening, and I'll now open it up to the commissioners, to the commission, for any questions. Again, if anybody have any other questions for the staff or any of the citizens who spoke this evening. And I'll start with Commissioner Hess on.
I have one question, if anybody can speak to it. I mean, it seems like
Again, either the staff or if there's a specific question for a speaker.
I asked the staff, then we've heard some questions about the movement of 100% second story to 75%. Do we know of any reason that what would be beneficial for it being 75%? I mean, every one of the comments we've heard seems to be against it. I just wanted to try to see if there's a counterbalancing point of view.
Well, Mr. Hess, the comments that we were receiving from a staff level were that, number 1, how do you define story? Number 2, what if someone tries to build a fake story? So there was concern over, well, how do you define story? So my initial reaction was that perhaps the second floor should also be 100%, until I started looking at it further and meeting with our building official and talking about, well, how do you exactly deal with that? And we had some staff meetings about it as well. If the top floor is the second floor, and if you have construction components that relate to how you may frame the structure and build the second floor, and if it is to be heated, usable, occupiable space, then we were concerned that that second floor could not be 100%. And the language that's in the current text regarding the outdoor area, a patio or whatever, that is not intended to be in that second story. It's written this way to exclude that from the second story requirement. So that's the rationale.
Yeah. How would an atrium be treated? So I'm trying to imagine a building with 2 stories and maybe usable areas on both sides, but is the atrium area, if something went straight up through the second to allow lighted, would that be counted?
Well, that was a concern as well, like how to deal with all the different aspects. And one of them was, well, what if someone builds an atrium and they call that their second floor? or they have a mezzanine inside the building and they call that their second floor. So that's the reason for identifying that it had to be heated occupiable space. I don't know that there's anything that we can write that can tie it down specifically where there's never any way to, challenge that, but this was an attempt to make it a tighter definition than it currently is.
Okay,
I have a question.
I'll go. All right, go ahead.
Commissioner Hess?
Well, if you would address me, we'll see what we have somehow. What's the question?
Maybe a point of clarification for staff, based on Commissioner Hess's question, as it relates to the rationale, if you will, for 75% as a placeholder number. So after meeting with building officials, the discussion points were, as it relates to the structures needed to support the second floor itself, that almost by definition you'd be losing square footage on floor number one, the floor beneath it, just for those structural elements. So coming out of the gate, you'd be less than 100% anyway.
Correct.
So really, as it relates to the phrase square footage, are we using like a BOMA standard to define that? Gross leasable area, net rentable area, heated occupiable area?
Heated occupiable area.
Okay. And so that I understand completely, the 75% is does not include outdoor
Correct.
patios, assembly areas, et cetera.
Correct.
Okay. And is there anything to suggest that the 75% number would take away from the visual perception or presentation of 2 stories from a design standpoint, or?
In my opinion, I don't believe so, because that takes into the consideration roof pitch versus flat roof. So I think with allowing for, or actually writing that into the ordinance, it does recognize that you may have some gable roofs and not flat roofs.
Anything further? I'll come back if you...
Okay.
Mr. Hunter? Were you finished? Oh, no, sorry. Mr. Hunter?
To address the second floor question, number one, I'd like to assure the people who commented they thought buildings along Peachtree that it should be a minimum, that it is a minimum. You just have snippets of the code here, but the 2-story is a minimum, and the question came up because one particular development was trying to game the 2-story requirement and throw up a little penthouse pop-up thing there and say, yeah, that's a second story, when in fact it was nothing more than a dead storage area. So that's why Ms. Cannon and the planning department was asked to define it more thoroughly and more clearly. So this is defined to prevent that kind of gaming from happening, but it has nothing to do with building higher, and in fact most developers would want to take advantage of the height allowed them, so 4 stories or 6 stories along Beach Street. And I think Ms. Cannon, Director Cannon has already probably clarified, if I understand correctly, the language that says the final clause, less than except outdoor assembly area, we're talking about outdoor assembly area on the first floor, correct?
Well, this would relate to the second floor. In other words, if you had a balcony and you were dining, that would not be included in the square footage of the second floor.
Okay, so
It's not heated and occupiable.
all right, so and so you have to have additional square footage that's 75% of the first floor, apart from whatever open decks or dining decks you have.
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. Well, I have to observe that, first of all, the other thing that was pointed out was if you are only requiring 75%, then it seems easy to get a variance to reduce that to 50%. Well, the fact is, if you're going for a variance, it's just as easy to remove the story altogether or reduce it to 25% or any percent, and we've already seen that with the vet clinic that is going up on Peachtree, where they very readily got a variance to remove the requirement altogether for a second story. So I don't think, since it's a variable item, I don't think there's any assurance that whatever you determine, whether it's 100%, 80%, 75%, that a variance is harder based on one of those numbers. Finally, I would say from an architect's perspective and a actually development perspective, I guess I don't really see the issue. I think the 75% accomplishes everything, ensuring that it is a true second story. Once a developer makes the investment of an elevator and significant second floor structure, it's really foolhardy to stop short. You're going to want to then maximize what area you can get on that second floor. It just simply makes economic sense. Before this language has been proposed, if this language were not in there, a developer could put up, like we said, a little pop-up thing with just a cheap stair to it and get by and say, I haven't spent much, and meanwhile I've kind of followed the letter of the code and I'm done. But now it has to be fully occupiable, which means ADA. It means you have to have a $50,000 elevator. It means that 75% you're going to be investing significant money in floor structure, both on the first floor to support the columns and posts, and then on the second floor to create a second floor structure. So, it just doesn't make sense to me that somebody's going to try to gain this once this language is in fact. So from an architect's perspective, I think we would like some design flexibility, so you can include two-story entry elements, and that would, be taken out from the second floor. I appreciate the concerns. I guess I'm not convinced that there's an issue with the 75%.
All right, thank you very much. And Commissioner Cameron.
I just had a question on the parking and the maximum number of spaces. I mean, to me, it makes sense because you don't want to have a gigantic parking lot as well, but can I have a little bit more clarification around that?
Actually, in the overlay, there are certain uses that have defined parking requirements, and it typically throughout the model of the ordinance, it does say minimum and maximum. The concern is that the comments that were made was that there was not enough parking for restaurants, and when they expand, then there's not enough parking for restaurants. So that's the reason we allowed more for restaurants. But we put a cap on it because you certainly don't want to see a sea of parking. And so that's the reason for capping it.
Thank you.
Sorry. Anything else?
No.
All right, well, let's go around one more time just to see if anybody's Mr. Hess?
I have no questions.
Mr. Howard?
Mr. Shearer, if I may ask a question, I was not totally clear on how important and why that first sentence you desired to see that removed. You think that would be an improvement?
The primary reason is that I believe it creates the argument for someone to come in and take a position that there is what I would say, a competing regulation provision or absence of competing regulation or provision. And the real question I'm asking is, do you need that first sentence? And my suggestion is you do not, to accomplish what it is that I believe the board is trying to do and what's been asked, which is to clarify that density is governed by the underlying zoning. And the argument that has been raised is that silence is in and of itself a conflict. That's what's been raised. And so my point to Mr. Hodry is, you can make an argument that is that competing or not. It's just adding words to what conflict may or may not mean. And I'm suggesting that by taking the sentence out, you remove someone being able to make that additional argument.
Okay, great. Thank you. One more? Okay.
No, Mr. Riley, could you please comment on that for us?
Well, I've looked at it previously, but I think that it's better to have it in there because there may be some competing regulations or provisions. There may be changes in the future that have competing regulations or provisions. But the absence of any provision in the overlay district, the zoning shall apply. And if there are none, no competing ones, then it does apply. It's not necessarily that it would always apply, but if there is a...
And if there are competing ones, how would you resolve it?
The resolution would be, the one that would control would be the competing regulation that you placed in there, rather than as a matter of law, that if you go and make a special regulation that targets something, and then you have a general rule, that this redefines the general rule, you would take the narrower constructed rule. I don't know that you have any that competes in there at this point in time. If you want to have an absolute on there, then you could strike that. But that certainly is going to limit how you make your overlay district in the future.
May I take the liberty of making a comment?
Yes, please.
Part of the reason in including that language the way it's written is that if you read the sentence prior to that, wherever the underlying zoning regulations are in conflict with the provisions of the overlay district, the regulations of this overlay district shall apply. So then you have to say, well, what's a conflict, which is the crux of the matter, which is what we've been dealing with, and if it's silent, is there a conflict? So that's the reason that defining sentence is in there. The conflict means there are competing regulations or provisions. So in the absence of a provision in the overlay, then it defaults to the base zoning.
Thank you. That's very clarifying to have it in a broader context, so that makes more sense to me. Yes.
And if I could...
Well, just one more comment, but we're not here to have a dialogue about pros and cons of individual senses. So if you, I think to be respectful, you can make one more comment, a closing comment on this.
Thank you, because again, all I'm after is to help clarify.
And we understand that. We're here just trying to help.
Which is it a competing provision to say that you want more density? I mean, the word density does show up in the overlay, and what I think is not intended by Ms. Cannon is to say that because there is a provision that talks about having higher density in various areas, is that intended to be a competing provision that may be used to, I think, contrary to what Ms. Cannon is asked to do, say that density is now governed somehow by the overlay.
Okay, we appreciate it, and we appreciate it. We appreciate your...
And one more comment from staff, and that is that prior to the insertion of this language, the staff is very clear, without this language, the staff is very clear that the underlying zoning in that regard prevails. I just want to make that clear.
Thank you. And we have two more just to make sure we've got everybody. Commissioner Schmidt, do you have anything you want to follow up on?
Mr. Chairman, the comment cards, please, just so I can refer to the right name. Gentleman that asked the question. The gentleman that brought forth the question on the parking and the maximum and used the Virginia Highlands example, you could raise your hand. Is he still here? He might have left.
Larry,
Okay. Mr. Chairman, it's a question that I had as related to maximum language, possibly to be directed to staff in the absence of the...
Sure.
gentleman who
Absolutely.
asked the question. To Director Cannon, the concern that was raised is by establishing a maximum on the parking figure, whether for restaurants or any other use, it could create a overflow as a byproduct into the neighboring communities, the secondary streets in the neighborhoods, Brookhaven Heights, for example. What would be the process by which residents could voice those concerns moving forward if there were parking situations that were patterns that were clear that, you know, they're log jamming the neighborhood streets?
I would say it would be the police department.
Police department?
Yes.
Okay. Currently, there are no permit requirements as it relates to parking in neighborhoods, et cetera.
Well, you would have to look at whether there are off-street parking requirements and things of that nature, but if there's overflow parking in areas where cars should not be, if they're parking on both sides of the street impeding emergency access, you're getting into a police department issue.
Okay. That's my question. Thank you.
No question.
All right, so everybody's had an opportunity, I think, to present. We've heard the staff recommendations, we've heard input from the public, and I'll entertain a motion now on this amendment. Actually, I don't know what I'm supposed to do in this process. Entertain a motion?
Make a motion to vote on these amendments?
Yeah, I'm looking for a motion on to approve or deny or to modify the amendment.
I'll make a motion to approve.
All right, so we have a motion to, I'm sorry.
And the staff recommended noted that there was a word that needs to be replaced, the word above versus about in paragraph 2. If you so choose to make that in your motion, we appreciate it.
I make the motion to accept the change in the word.
And to approve so as I understand, the motion is to approve the text amendment RZ 13-02 as amended, as corrected by the staff?
Yes.
Okay, so Commissioner Cameron is in. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay. All in favor of approving the motion as amended by correction, signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the amendment has been approved by the Planning Commission for recommendation for approval to the mayor and the council.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We appreciate everyone's input. We appreciate what we heard. And we're here to represent and balance the needs of the public and the city of Brookhaven. So thank you very, very much. All right, we have one more piece of business. Is there a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Make a motion to adjourn.
I have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your input.